Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have the last part of your notes for the Africa unit, starting with Chapter 32, Section 2, Africa and the Post-Colonial African Continent. So, we're going to talk a little bit about some things that are happening in Africa, some of it a little bit more short term, some of it things that had been brewing for some time. So, in the 1970s coalition of African nations, other countries voted to deny South Africa a seat in the United Nations General Assembly. The UN, which is headquartered out of New York, its General Assembly is kind of like a Congress of all nations of the world. And many nations, including the United States, refused to trade with South Africa. And this is all because of the issue of apartheid. A lot of that kind of stems for the events that happened after about 1977 with the death of Steve Biko. Anyway, the ANC, or the African National Council, was formed much, much earlier in 1912. And it was a reform movement led by lawyers who encouraged the use of civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is basically breaking, or I would say refusing to follow rules. Okay, and this has been done throughout history. If you go back and you study some things that happened with the continent of or the country of India, you'll hear about Mahatma Gandhi, or if you know a little bit about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., you'll know that civil disobedience is a very effective method. Anyway, by the 1960s, the ANC had become a little more radical, and hence they became big targets of the Afrikaner government. So, in number three, the Soweto uprising, which happened in the basically 1975, I believe, was sparked due to a new policy that required Black students to be taught Afrikaans, which is kind of a Dutch language. And as a result, many of these students protested, and as a result, many of them were beaten, if not killed. The photo that you see at the bottom right hand corner is a photo that was taken that day, that certainly has become kind of the catalyst for the anti apartheid movement. Steve Biko was a Black protester who basically was the leader of the Black consciousness movement, and he fought apartheid and was eventually captured and killed by white police. And his death really made him a martyr. Matter of fact, a lot of people probably know more about Nelson Mandela, but really it was Biko's death that really got people interested in this movement, and as a result, really starts moving more attention back to guys like Mandela. Anyway, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was a bishop in the Anglican Church of South Africa, called for nonviolence and interracial reconciliation. And as a result of that, in 1984, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He was, I think, very passionate as far as helping open the minds and hearts of a lot of folks. And because of his religious background, I think a lot of people respected his perspective on this movement. 1983, Asian and also colored in South Africa were given representation in the government's three-party system. And eventually, whites are still going to control the majority of the government, but this is one of the first times that minorities, I shouldn't say political minorities, not necessarily population minorities, were given a voice within the South African government. Nelson Mandela, who you see pictured down at the bottom left hand corner and also in the center, he was a member of the ANC, and back in the 1960s, he was imprisoned for his involvement in the anti-apartheid movement. And he was sent to Robben Island, which was a place where many Black Africans, South Africans, were sent, for the most part, to continue to keep them voiceless. Not much was heard or seen of Mandela for the many years that he was held captive, but he still was a powerful presence in what was happening in that nation. By the time we get closer to the 90s, South African President F.W. de Klerk helped to end apartheid by releasing Mandela from prison, and he reinstated the African National Council. No longer had they been basically banned, and he allowed for the first non-racial election in the early 1990s, where he actually was running against Nelson Mandela. And as a result, Nelson Mandela wins the election, and F.W. de Klerk has to step down for power. Elsewhere in the continent of Africa, we had some events that were not necessarily so pleasant. The genocide of the 1990s in Rwanda resulted in the Hutu led government encouraging the destruction of the Tutsis and some of the moderate Hutus. Um, this is kind of going back to old tribal days. And as a result of some intervention from European powers, we had a situation where we had some groups that were holding some power and some who weren't, and the next thing you know, we have a full-out genocide that's happening. This took place in 1994, and it left a lot of Rwandans fleeing the nation if they could. There was also many dictatorial or dictatorships that were happening in the continent of Africa following the Cold War. A lot of that is because of a lack of funding from the U.S., also kind of the intervention of the Soviet Union and other countries that had previously given money to dictators who basically sided with them. One of the probably more well known leaders is a guy that we're going to talk about here in a moment. Anyway, in number 11, since independence, Africa has faced a lot of environmental challenges. Desertification is occurring because of a lot of the issues with global warming. You have the spreading of desert like conditions contributing to things like droughts and famine. There's also the spread of HIV and AIDS that has challenged many African nations since independence. Only a small portion of Africans with AIDS are receiving treatment due to a lack of education and a lack of infrastructure to deliver treatment. And finally, a lack of money to pay for these expensive treatments as well. I mentioned before there were dictators, and probably one of the more famous and notorious of them was a man named Idi Amin. Amin came to power in kind of the early 1970s and held power in the country of Uganda until about 1979. But he was absolutely a dictator and treated his people very brutally. And he is not alone. I mean, we had several of these, and even to this day, there's some examples of that that still exist within the continent. So, in number 13, ethnic violence plagued the nation of Sudan, which is the largest nation in Africa. In the western province of Darfur, Arab militias, with the support of the Arab-led government, attacked nomadic Christians over water rights to denial, and more than 200,000 people were killed, and about 2 million were forced to flee to neighboring Ethiopia. In 2008, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for the Sudanese president, known as Omar Hassan al-Bashir, for genocide and war crimes, and these crimes were also crimes against humanity. In February of 2020, al-Bashir was handed over to The Hague, which is in the Netherlands. It's kind of where the International Court for NATO holds its trials and such. In 2011, South Sudan actually became an independent nation, and so the country of Sudan was split in half as a result of that. Thank you very much.